Welcome. Uh, I'd like to thank you for coming in. For me, it's 5 o'clock in the morning in Melbourne, in Australia, but I welcome those who have decided to attend. What I wanted to cover and get into a bit of discussion is how major people are actually using the software. What I might do is unmute so people can ask questions as I go along. Right.
Hello, and thank you for your holding this webinar.
You're welcome.
Hello, Gregory.
If there's too much feedback, I might mute just while I run through it, and then I'll open up the microphones. Okay.
Thank you.
The first thing I wanted to cover is the product's got a fairly good history. It's celebrating its 5th birthday. It has been around since August 2010 when the first release came out. At that time, I had been working for Primavera Australia for many years and recognised both within the company and with the consulting to major corporations and government departments that there was a need for protecting the configuration data inside Primavera's databases, because every time somebody imported something, they would be getting loads and loads of new calendars and resources, and for a shared database it was becoming a bit of a mess. So there was a problem with maintaining configurations, and as the years progressed, more and more functionality was added to the software, and during 2014 we embarked on a major improvement and produced a new product out of the old one, the English version, and offered all our existing users to migrate to XER Manager Professional, which was released in June this year. The three main functions of Professional are not only cleaning files, but also managing them, and I was always upset with the reporting capabilities that you found in Primavera P6. The complexities of installing business intelligence when really you only wanted a bit of project intelligence. So XER Manager Professional has got 2 report writers built into it, which I'm very happy with, because it has calculated fields and parameters and all the things that you always wanted, such as graphics and charts, and taking complete control over the look and feel. So 5 years of proven history. Large corporations, I won't name them all, but they're in the billion-dollar marks. One of them's the top 50, in the top 50 of the largest companies in the world. So for people who may not be familiar what XER files are, I'm just going to give just a quick short explanation of the problems that people have, and then I'll run into a live demonstration and discussion. So XER files are come out of a Primavera database. Let's call that the source. And the original, I've been involved with Primavera P6 going right back to when it was called P3E. When it was first released, version 1.5 in 1999. And the co-founders of Primavera had purchased the software from a company called Eagle Ray, and the XER actually comes from Extract Eagle Ray, if anybody wanted to really know. But nevertheless, point 2 there, an XCR file contains all the necessary data from that source database so that you could recreate that any of the exported projects if you imported them into another database. Let's call that the target. And that included all the user-defined fields, their values, codes, etc., that those projects used. And it included project calendars, even if they weren't being used, all the project level activity codes, even if they aren't being used. But it's interesting to note that if there were any inter-project dependencies and those projects weren't exported, what a lot of people don't know is actually sitting in the XCR file is details about projects that you did not export. And that would include WBS breakdown structures, budget information, and just the activities that are associated with the interface. So I decided to call them phantom projects because they are in the XCR file. Not when you go to import Primavera P6 do you see them though. Now let's start off with a couple of warnings. A lot of people use Excel parsers, or they might use text editors for changing data. And there's a couple of warnings on those. I'll just bring them to your attention. Given that there's 70 different types of data that you'll find in XCR files. Oh, by the way, XCR Manager can clean XML files too, but let's just concentrate on XCR. The first one, if you manually edit, I have a global calendar, and what I'd like to do is make it a project calendar. So you jump into Notepad and decide, I know where there's a field called scope. I'll just change its value from AS Global to AS Project. I'll look up the internal ID of the project and assign that as a project over, and yep, I can now import it and it comes in as a project calendar. But there's a bit of a warning there. If there happened to be a resource, let's say, or another project who had been using that global calendar in that XCR file, then that resource of that other project is now pointing to a project calendar. So you may actually end up with a project calendar being the parent of a resource calendar or another project calendar, and it looks quite strange when you get inside P6 if you do that. So XCR Manager will actually create copies of calendars to solve that problem. Similarly, for project codes, global codes, activity codes, it will duplicate those if there's more than one project in the XCR file. The other one is a lot of people don't realize that Excel, even the latest version of Excel, any field, cell in an Excel spreadsheet has a limit of 32,000, well, 32K, so 32 times 1024. If you have a fairly large calendar, and it doesn't have to be that large, it will actually truncate it when you push it out to Excel, and then when you rebuild the XCR file, you'll actually lose a lot of your calendar. So a little bit of a warning there. This was discovered, XCR Manager's used, and it's pretty much the de facto standard in the rail industry in one of the states of Australia, and they ran just a simple test, actually using XCR Manager, just checking the size of fields, and had they used the file parser, they would have lost about 3 or 4 calendars, would have been truncated, and they would lose data. Given they were using those calendars for track possessions of railway, that could have been quite nasty. So just a little warning there. So what are the actual problems that requires a bit of software to solve it? So I call them sharing dilemmas. So there are 2 sharing dilemmas. The first one is when you're receiving files from other parties. Let's say someone's sent you an XCR file, or you need to send an XCR file to somebody. And the two dilemmas, let me cover the receiving dilemma. So there's this little diagram is just trying to say, well, what's actually inside the XCR file? Well, you've got a lot of project data. And that project data is split into two types. There's data in that XCR file that you need, and there's data that you don't need, that you couldn't really care about. The needed data and the data that you don't need is split into two, what I call core and extras. So core data, for example, would be the activities or the relationships. But the extras might be some of the user-defined fields, or could even be issues. The data you don't need, of course, is split into core. So I didn't need it, but it needs to come across anyway. So how do you handle that data if you coming into your systems? Well, the first thing is you need a mechanism to remove the extras that you don't need. So that's quite safe to do. So let's get rid of the codes, the fields, issues, anything that we're interested in that's not part of the core and you don't need. So XCR Manager has the capability to remove those. The remaining of what's needed, you need to be able to change their names and map them to the names that you use in your system. So for example, if you need the resource assignments, then you actually need the resources, but if you may want to map those resources to the ones you've got, or you may have notebook topics you may have one called project notes, and incoming notebook topic is project notebooks. You don't want to end up with multiple notebook topics confusing your existing users. You want to rename them so they map to the existing ones. So the yellow bits would be renamed. So even ones that you don't need but they are core, in other words, they have to come across, you can put mapping rules in. The ones that you don't need, you really want to isolate them. And an example would be is I need the resources to come across, but I don't want them to accidentally match the resources I've got because somebody used the same name. Or there's a calendar coming across, and I don't want it to accidentally match the calendar I've got. So one way to isolate those is to prefix them, and then you're guaranteeing that it won't match. So even if a resource appears in a different structure inside the XCR file and it happens to have the same ID as one it found, even if you don't have access to that resource, so your security is locked down, you can't even see part of that resource pool, it will tidy it up, match it up. Next thing you know, you've got resources, assignments to resources that you don't have access to. So you need a facility to prefix. In the dilemma of sending data, you have two types of data, and I apologise for the acronyms here. The project data, when you're sending an XCR file to somebody, you have data that you're willing to share, so that's the WTS, and you also have data that you're really not willing to share. And that data may be, oh look, you've got margins, or you've got cost fields, you've got issues in your project with respect to the contractor that you're sending the XCR file to. Or you're a contractor and you've got your profit margins in there and you don't really want that information to go upwards. So it's split into data that you're willing to share and data you're not willing to share. So again, that's split into core and extras. So there's the core data that you actually have to give them, and then there's some extras that you don't have to give them. So you need a way to address those. Well, again, you could just remove the extras of the data that you're not willing to share. That's easy enough. But how do you handle data that you must give them but you're not willing to share. In other words, it's sensitive data, but you don't really want them to give it. So an example of that may be that you need to give them the activities and the resource assignments, therefore you need to give them parts of your resource pool, but you really don't want to give them your resource names. Now, prefixing them is not going to do anything. So there's the ability to mask those names. We call them obfuscation. Nice word. Comes out of the IT area that stops making source code of programs readable. So you can't remove it because it's core, but what you can do is mask it so that people can't understand it. And a simple way of masking it is to replace, for example, the names of resources by simply their internal IDs, and so people don't know exactly who you're talking about. On top of all that, the data that you're not willing to share, so you've got to pass over the resource details, and you've obfuscated their names, but there may be email addresses in there and their title and things that you really don't want to share. So what you can do is you can spot clean those fields. So you basically say, look, I'm going to clear out the titles. I'm going to clear out the telephone numbers. I don't want people having access to that private information as it's sent out. So, and I'm sure that the individuals don't want their telephone numbers and employee codes, etc., being emailed around the world. So there's a facility, what we call Spot Clean, where you can pick any field and clear it, or in actual fact, you can change its value. One of the spot cleaning you can do is, for example, you could change the case of an activity. You know, somebody supplies an activity name and it's all in uppercase, you could move it to lowercase or proper case. Or selectively, you may want all the milestones shifted up to uppercase because that's your standards. So there is spot cleaning. So the three use cases that XCR Manager is being used for is when you receive files. So just recounting there that if you simply import them, Primavera P6, if they're not in the database, it will configure them for you as if some administrator had actually inserted them. So you'll get user-defined fields and project codes and activity codes. All that unwanted data will come in. If you get rid of them, of course, then it will reduce the size of your input file. And one of the most common things right now is people are getting into is I'd like to get rid of the OBS, just reduce it to one OBS instead of having the whole structure, and map it to one of mine, or get rid of the performing organisational breakdown structure, which is the POBS, which appears to be polluting a few of the XCR files these days. If simply imported, the required fields may have different names. So, for example, your units of measure, activity codes, and notebook topics, you can map those names and to get rid of the clashes, as we talked about before, you can prefix them before importing. And when you're sending files out, we talked about the sensitive data, so you could actually clear the budgets and the issues and logs, things that you don't want. You have to, that you can delete, and if you can't delete them, then you can spot clean them. We talked about those phantom projects in there. So you exported one project, but you didn't realize that your XCR file actually had 15 projects in it. Go to import, P6 says there's only one project in there, but in actual fact, you may find the work breakdown structured and the budget logs of 15 other projects. So XCR Manager will actually address phantom data as well, so you can obfuscate it, etc. The third use case is merging databases and consolidation mapping. And a few months ago, a a Platinum Oracle partner was actually recommending XDR Manager to its client to assist in that, which was, I suppose, was a smile on our faces that we developed a facility to repeat the migration. Because you can have a template, you simply click the button. Because you can run it across a whole folder of XDR files in one click, they can actually set up all the mapping for the migration of one database to another, and they have a repeatable process. So when the day comes, they've been able to test it, and then when the day comes, they can just press the button and it happens just the way they tested it. So there's just a few things there what it can do. Simple things like downgrading the version number, but it can do a number of other things. For example, it can change your global data down to project level data, remove unwanted project calendars, etc. There's a number of things that are very easy to do. So what I